back to Impact. So I watched Slammiversary, and the morning of Slammiversary, Sean Ross Sapp was teasing a story that was supposed to come out. It had something to do with Impact, and saying that it was going to get a ton of people talking. And I was like, what could it possibly be? And I was thinking maybe it was going to be a surprise, right? A surprise debut. Well, it turned out that it was a surprise. And it was, not the biggest superstar surprise, but it was Eric Young. Eric Young had returned to Impact. Eric Young had left Impact. They murdered him on television, but you never saw the body, so he wasn't actually dead. And he went seemingly to WWE in November of last year, but he never showed up on television. And the story that was being told, and I heard about this, and I believe it, that he told Sean Ross Sapp, and he's actually told Denise Salcedo, and he's done some other interviews out there, that he quit WWE. He asked for his release in April because he could not morally work for Vince McMahon. And I think everybody can guess why those reasons are. I heard through a friend of mine, this kind of plugged in, that it very much had everything to do with the allegations that were levied upon Vince from the last couple of years. So we can leave it at that. But he said he just can't, like, morally, creatively, personally, and professionally, he just could not work for Vince McMahon. And April is when Vince basically took his job back over full time. They merged with the UFC. They did the whole thing. So Vince is back in the saddle. So Eric Young left a lot of money on the table. He had like a 9-month paid vacation because they never brought him into work. So he's sitting home collecting a paycheck. But because that paycheck was written by Vince McMahon, he said, I can't take the money anymore. And he got his release, and he went back home to Impact, man. And you know what? I think that's a profile in moral courage, because a lot of people have morals until those are paycheck involved. And once that paycheck is involved, they no longer have the same morals that they used to have. A lot of times people are confronted with, what's more important to me, money or dignity? And a lot of times they choose money. Well, Eric Young chose dignity this time, and I got to praise him for that. So kudos to Eric Young.
Yeah, I was surprised that he, being somebody that really covered the old school, early, late 90s, early 2000s side of the business, and, he was brought up to speed by a lot of guys who wrestled in the 60s and 70s and the 80s. I mean, this was not a decision you would have ever seen. I mean, they wouldn't have cared about, the character of the company or anything like that. And I think it's really refreshing to see what Eric did. I mean, the allegations that are levied at Vince is the stuff he's paid millions and millions of dollars for to settle in courtrooms and things like that. And it's also cost him a lot of free agent talent. Some guys that are big names in AEW were really close to going to one guy in particular, he was really close to going to WWE, and this week he came back, he changed his mind. But it's just, to me, I think you're going to see more decisions like this, especially on the women's side of the roster, because of the nature of the allegations. I don't think it's going to be a wholesale flood of people leaving unless more things come out, which kind of surprises me that he's, the Endeavor sale went forward like he is, because they must be pretty fairly certain there's nothing else out there left. But I do think that you might see some women leave on the women's side. I don't know, but I don't think it's going to be a wholesale, everyone's gone. You open the doors and it's like, it's like the AWA back in '83. There's somebody left. But I think it's going to be an impact there. I think it's something that it's going to be something Vince is going to have to deal with. I also think this tells you a lot about the current generation of wrestlers, what Eric Young did. I don't think he's not the only guy thinking like this. And I think for him to make this decision, especially after it seemingly is cooled off, you don't hear people talking about this story like they did. I think it says a lot about him as an individual, and I'm glad he made that decision for himself. I'm glad he did it. I can also understand why some people wouldn't. You got to live, and you got to eat, and you got to have. And then there's only 2 big companies in the world right now, and you're not guaranteed success jumping from one to the other. And so to make that kind of decision, I think is very admirable.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, I'm sure his coach, Scott D'Amore, who was the president of Impact, is probably paying him pretty decently, but he's not gonna be able to pay him WWE money. They just don't have those kind of resources. So, kudos to him. Also coming out of Slammiversary, Nick Aldis, he was in the main event. And then he ended up wrestling at the tapings that weekend, and they have announced that, or it's not announced, but It came out through PW Insider that Nick Aldis is actually leaving the company. There's rumors that there's some WWE interest there. There's also rumor that they might be interested in him as an agent. Like Nick Aldis for the modern era is not exactly like a hot commodity, I would say, but I think Aldis could work as a wrestler on television for them. Like I would say in the ring, he's better than Eli Drake. He doesn't have the Eli Drake gimmick. The only thing they like about him is he says, yeah. I think Aldis is a better promo than Eli Drake, or what's his name now? LA Knight. I'm sorry, LA Knight. I think there's something that can be done with Aldis if he were to make a run in WWE.
I mean, look at Dominic Mysterio. I mean, he's not exactly the greatest ring worker in the world. He doesn't have the best size, but he's magnetic with the crowd. People pay a lot of money to watch him get beat, and they pay a lot of money just to watch him. And Nick Aldis is a great promo. He really did a lot of work to help, bring the NWA title back. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be sustained, but he's a good promo. He's a very good promo. He's a very good heel. He's got a great look. I think he could definitely work in WWE as a wrestler. I think as an agent, it'd be interesting to see. I think he'd be great at a lot of the basics, a lot of things like that. He's not a very, his style is very much old school. It's very WWE style, main event, bigger guy style. I'm not sure he's not much of a contemporary kind of guy like you see, maybe more like a Chris Hero would be, or a Dutt. But to me, I think that I think he'd be a very valuable asset to them if he were to pick him up. I've liked watching Nick for a while. I think he's got a lot of charisma, and it'd be a shame to see him go off TV. I think just yet. I'd like to see him. I think he could still could have done a lot of good work in Impact. I think he could do a lot of Rev Pro. I think there's still future out there if he wants to keep wrestling. But some of these guys are getting up there. It's like, how much longer is Ibushi going to want to do this? How much longer does Omega want to do this? How much longer is, a lot of guys. And, maybe for him, he's going to hit that point. But, he'd definitely be an asset to WWE. I think either backstage or, I think I could see him as being a guy in NXT. He's kind of an upper mid card who could really, bring the heel heat when he needs to and be a good guy who can, fill a few roles there.
Yeah. His only value to Impact I felt was going to be as the world champion, as the heel world champion, and trading that title back and forth as one of the top guys. I just don't think they wanted him to be that. They only signed him to a 3-month deal. He came in at Rebellion in April and then he was gone by July. And so I think, and they signed him right as Josh Alexander got hurt. And Josh Alexander ended up returning after that main event. So it kind of tells you why they brought in Nick Aldis, is because Josh Alexander got hurt. So hey, we got a main eventer here who's a free agent. We'll bring him in on a short-term deal. But Alexander had tore his tricep. He's back in 3 or 4 months time frame, which is pretty incredible. That's usually a 6-month healing time. Not only that, he has taken over Scott D'Amore's wrestling school, the Can-Am Dojo, that's produced a ton of guys, the Motor City Machine Guns, not Eric Young, but Bobby Roode, Joe Doring, Kushida went through there. A lot of guys have gone through that. Moose went through that dojo. So he is now the head coach. He is in Windsor full time. He said he's going to be traveling out of Detroit to make it easier for bookers to bring him in, these indie promotions to be able to bring him in. So I think that's a cool deal. And that also tells me that Josh Alexander is probably an Impact lifer going forward.
Yeah, I think he's happy there. I think AEW had a lot of interest in him at one point, but he seems to be happy there. I think he likes working with Scott. Obviously, they got a close relationship, but Nick was kind of like the contract's so short and everything. He's kind of like a waiver wire pickup. Like he's it's like, oh, we need a 5th receiver, we need a 4th receiver. I mean, Nick's probably Nick's is better than that, but he was a good pickup for them for a while. But I think.
Or like in baseball, somebody you get right at the trade deadline that's contract's running out at the end of the season, right? You pick them up for the playoffs.
Get a 3rd starter for the playoff rotation. Yeah, that was Nick. Yeah. Maybe maybe Nick can make that his career model from now on, being the guy to come in. But I think Alexander's a great talent. I always enjoyed watching him a lot. But I think it's good news that he's be working with the wrestling school and taking that over. I think there's just not I'm really concerned about the future training in the wrestling business. I don't think successful as I like. I think AEW has a very solid brain trust. I think that's where they've invested well and done a lot of good things. New Japan Dojo is great, but it's like this only Nightmare Factory is really good, but it's like I think with the popularity of the business right now, you're going to have a lot of McDojos open up, as they would call it in the jiu-jitsu world, and hopefully we can keep guys like Josh out there teaching people and keeping the wisdom going. But to me, that's a big concern. Just make it. I just seen a lot of. I remember the indie days back in early 2000s. I don't want to see it like it was again, where guys were
Yeah.
garage and they wrestled one dark match in 1970 for a company you never heard of, and then they're taking money and all this other stuff. I'm hoping that we'll see more legitimacy coming forward. I think it's been that way over the last several years. Hopefully, it keeps going that way.
Yeah, hopefully, and I think Josh Alexander has a lot to offer because he's seen the dark side of the business. He's had a really successful run since he's been in Impact, and this could be a place for Impact, kind of like a farm system for them that can kind of grow talent through this Can-Am Dojo. You know what I mean? And that's been a pretty D'Amore has a very successful track record of producing great talent. So I think that's a win-win for everybody in that company.